We're building dreams, one brick at a time. Through the ups and downs we will climb. Keep pushing forward, reaching for the sky. In the property management industry, we'll fly high. This journey's paved with stories untold. Every corner of the world, bold and cold. We face each challenge with a smile, making every tough mile worth the while. Hand in hand we'll overcome, through every storm and then some. With the hope as our guide, we stand strong. In this dance of life we belong. Chasing tomorrow we won't stop. With every step we'll reach the top. Together we'll build, day by day. In the dance of tomorrow we'll find our way. Chasing the sunrise, embracing the light. We're always on the go, we won't stop. Wherever we won't stop. With every step we'll reach the top. Together we'll shine, hearts alive. In this world our dreams intertwine. Together we'll build, day by day. In the dance of tomorrow we'll find our way. Chasing the sunrise. Tick tock, the day drags on. Your brain's on fire with questions galore. From angry tenants to that weird stain on the floor. Counting seconds till our show comes on. We might have answers, yes, that's our name. Your burning questions are why we came. We'll fix your problems, or at least we'll try. It's time for our show, let your troubles fly. Marketing blues got you feeling low, wondering how to make those vacancies go. Career ladder looking mighty steep. Tune into our show, no need to weep. We might have answers, yes, that's our name. Your burning questions are why we came. We'll fix your problems, or at least we'll try. It's time for our show, let your troubles fly. We might have answers, let your troubles fly. Marketing blues got you feeling low, wondering how to make those vacancies go. Career ladder looking mighty steep. Tune into our show, no need to weep. We might have answers, yes, that's our name. Your burning questions are why we came. We'll fix your problems, or at least we'll try. It's time for our show, let your troubles fly. Meetings, nightmares, leasing woes. How to handle that resident who never shows. From clogged toilets to cranky bosses, we might have answers for all your losses. We might have answers, yes, that's our name. Yes, that name. Your burning questions are why we came. We'll fix your problems, or at least we'll try. We might have answers, let your troubles fly. So bring your troubles, your doubts, your fears. We'll sprinkle wisdom and maybe some cheers. Oh, our circle's wide. down fast. We might have answers, that's what we do. Your multi-family queries, we'll see them through. We'll try to fix them, or at least we'll try. We might have answers, give us a try.
And all right, I believe we should be live. What's up, everyone? Welcome. Let me turn this off because that would be embarrassing. I'll get the stream chat pulled up over here next to me. Awesome. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the third official episode of We Might Have Answers, where at some point we're probably going to eventually start getting questions on this show. But in the meantime, I'm really enjoying having people who I've known in the industry or gotten to know in the industry on, just to talk kind of what's going on. And for those of you who've been living under a rock for the past couple of years, you probably recognize my guest this week. And it's Tony Sousa with RPM Living. And I'll let Tony maybe introduce himself a little bit, and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I look forward to the conversation. Appreciate the work that you've done over the years as well. I think there's just the thought leadership work that you've pushed forward, and yeah, so I'm honored to be here. Yeah, what I do, so I'm the Vice President of Marketing Relations, ultimately sort of the brand ambassador for RPM Living. RPM Living, if you're not familiar with RPM Living, top 3 management company in the country, oversees 200,000 plus units coast to coast, so super exciting. And I'm super privileged to be in the role that I am, and represent the company as a brand ambassador or the spokesperson, and embodies essentially the brand of the company in human form. So I try to do my best job.
Yeah, fantastic. And you've been in the industry for actually, I think, a little bit longer than me, at least maybe on the multifamily side. I know I went full time in multifamily in 2008. Actually, when I joined Roscoe, now RPM, and I think you were what, 2005, 2006.
Actually, yeah, 2004 or 5. Yeah, started on that leasing floor. So I got my leasing chops early, as I think a lot of people in this industry kind of start at entry level, and you don't always have to, but I think it's really provided a full color, full 360 of kind of how the industry works and all elements of different roles and different jobs, on the site level.
It was a fall into it situation.
Yeah. So I mean, kind of standard. I mean, I hate to be so cliche. I try to provide some spice to this answer.
Well,
but,
that's why cliches are cliche, right?
Oh, yeah. But I mean, it's you don't know about these types of industries. You don't know this is even a job. And the reality is, you go into an office and you realize, hey, I think I could be pretty good at that. I mean, the driver for me, I mean, and I've told the story a time or two. I was just engaged, and I had to figure out how to save some money for a wedding. And I thought, what better ways to save some money on rent? And I think I could do. I always knew I had an ability to sell. I always knew I had an ability to connect and had some little charisma being an actor and a reporter before. But I just wanted to do it for commission. And I was a waiter at the time, and I figured this was an elevated commission at the time for me.
Yeah, that skill set, especially if you're a waiter in a nice restaurant, translates fairly well to what we do, where you're having to upsell and more just like build relationships in very short periods of time with people, which
Yeah.
really
Well,
defines leasing in a lot of ways.
And I would tell everybody all the time, like if you can be a waiter and be successful in that space, not everybody has to be a waiter to be good at customer service, but you're dealing with patrons, you're dealing with customers that are hungry. Okay, first and foremost, like if you can settle someone down that's hungry, hangry as they call them, also give good service and have them, maybe enter hangry but leave happy. You're pretty good at what you do.
Yeah, for me the best way step is always with people who build relationships in that very tight period of time,
Yeah.
where they find a way, whether it's never something big, it's usually a small comment or something that feels relatable. And I don't know, that was on our list of things to talk about, but when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, that fits kind of my mental model of and having gotten to know you a little bit, but also kind of what defines a lot of people who find success, at least early in the industry. And we can get into the somewhat like dissociative experience of being new to the industry, of starting in sales and then moving to accounting and then moving to like a project management role.
Yeah.
But I know when we've been chatting before this, one of the things that you kind of challenged me was, we both tend to think a little bit outside of the box, and we're trying to come at things from a really pragmatic way, and to kind of avoid the headlines a bit, and to focus on maybe what's kind of bubbling under the surface, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Because I think you and I both agree there's some kind of big things shaping the industry. And as we get ready to jump into that, I'll just mention for anyone who's watching live, I have reminders this week to remind myself to mention, jump in the chat, ask your questions. We have the live chat running next to me. Tony and I would both love to hear your questions. We're talking about anything, whether it's something we're talking about or not. But a place where I've been spending a lot of time lately is I've been thinking a lot about turnover, and really bigger picture, the things that throughout my entire career, which is almost 20 years now, much like yours, where there's some themes of things that are always being spoken about, and staffing always seems to be one of those. I don't feel like there was ever a time when people felt good about staffing. When you're talking to kind of executives, and at the companies that I've worked at, it's always been a huge focus of getting people in. Yet I've started. I had this epiphany maybe a couple of years ago that I think we're looking at it wrong. I see our challenge actually as a retention problem, not necessarily as a hiring problem, because we seem to eventually fill all these roles, but then we still have a 30+% turnover rate. I did some quick math because numbers are fun, kids, and math is actually kind of where a lot of this business matters. I'm a big fan of saying that you make value in the details. But over the last 10 years, or maybe 14 years, we've effectively restaffed the entire multifamily industry 4.3 times. That's why I have notes, is because I have actual stats. I don't want to just go offhand. The industry employs somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 people nationally. At a 30% turnover rate, that means we're hiring at least 150,000 people a year. If you assume half of someone's salary to replace them, and some estimates say it goes up to as high as 200%. The conservative estimate is it's $4.125 billion in turnover costs affecting the industry. That's a tremendous dollar amount, and it could be as high as 13 when you start taking into the ripple effect, right? Not just the direct replacement, but the job productivity loss and everything else. And I know you mentioned burnout, too much tech, as things that we can maybe talk about. I actually think onboarding and training lumps in there really well, because I tend to see people who leave because they don't feel like they can win.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Thanks for sharing that, by the way, and doing some homework and putting all those numbers together. I think ultimately what you're saying is the elephant in the room is there's a lot of costs that have been spent on trying to figure out this.
Or maybe some overlooked opportunity.
Well, there's always overlooked opportunity when you have spend that is either, let's say it hasn't been overly effective. So I think in stories, I think oftentimes in a linear fashion, in that I think this was bubbling under the surface to the theme that we talked about a little bit earlier, leading into the pandemic. And I think staff has always been sort of trying to voice their frustration about, I think, culture. And I don't think this is just a multifamily industry thing, but since we've been in this business, it's a business that we know very well. So I think it's just been something over the decades that I think staffs have, and we have to keep in mind, and I have to remind myself too, this business has over the last 15, 20 years maybe become a lot more sophisticated than it ever was, right? It was a landlord business, and it was like, listen, pay your rent or get out of here, right? So,
Yeah.
so now it's become more sophisticated with institutional clients, higher level, beautiful developments in urban parts of town all over the country, and so now it's attracting competent people, right? And so over the years it's been bubbling, and then what happened is the pandemic arrives, and it's a chaotic situation in the world, but it's a chaotic situation in the workplace, and what it brought to the attention of staff is this is what you really think of me, and how you treated my health and safety during that time. And what I heard across the country at the time was, my company is looking out for me and my health and my family, or in large percentage, they weren't, right? We got to call everybody sort of essential workers, and hey, we're there for you, but you know what? It's too dangerous for us to come and visit you or help clean a doorknob or anything like that. Good luck out there, right? So that was what I think a lot of the site team members were feeling at the time. It's like, we're on an island out here, and we have a lot of stuff going on. We're scared. We don't know what's going on, and no one's coming out to like even check on us, right? They're dropping off goodie bags and taking off. And I understand this is a bit of a hot take, but I'll tell you, in that moment, as a leader, overseeing teams and portfolios for me, I knew I had to be more invested and show them it's not just lip service. I want to help you, and I want to be able to clean doorknobs with you and do some other things. And it was a pivotal time in my own career that I saw. It was a great divide of leadership I saw. It was those willing to put themselves on the line and say, I'm with you as a commander. I'm with you. I'm not going to leave you behind. Or good luck out there. We support you. We're going to try to craft some policies behind closed doors that are in your favor. And that's all nice. But what these site team members wanted was physical support and other levels of support. So, no surprise to anyone, 2021 arrives, the great resignation, right? The pandemic simmers. People feel like there's some stabilization in the workforce, and employees forgave, but they did not forget. And so in 2021, the great resignation happened, right? And so you had a lot of sort of senior level leaders wondering what is going on and why is everybody leaving? Now, at the same time, in my own portfolio, and I think in other companies and other situations, I didn't have much turnover at that time. But I also knew it was also correlated to some of the actions that I took in 2020 that were actually put my own perceived health on the line to show them that, listen, I'm not just lip service for you guys, but I'm going to help you in this situation, put myself on the line. So 2021 arrives, and everyone's taken off, right? They forgave because they're nice people, but they didn't forget. And they wanted a different environment. They wanted a different culture. And they wanted just something different. Now, that didn't always work out for everybody, because just to leave doesn't mean the grass is greener on the other side always. But that's what happened. And so now here we are, a couple of years stumbling out of that thing. Some people are probably at companies they didn't want to be at, but they just felt they had to make a move. For me, it's really important to know the context in which it was bubbling. Some world event happens, and it really tips the scales. And here we are.
Well, and to your point, to your kind of point at the beginning, I think it's been going on since we crested 30% as an industry in turnover rate in 2011 for the first time, and it hasn't looked back. Granted, it spiked up a lot in 2021. It popped up almost 40 as the industry, which is just kind of bonkers. But preceding that, maintenance roles, it was close to 40, leasing roles, it was close to 40 already. Those really key entry points into the industry. And then as you look at, Appfolio NAA did a great survey that Appfolio published that really kind of walks through each role. And as you get into more senior roles, people, obviously they're more committed, they have more to lose, they're less prone to leave. But I really feel like this was kind of inevitable. I feel like I would say the thing over the past 2 years, even more so than the pandemic, that's fueling some of it and fueling some of the stress that we hear about. One of it's too much tech, which you mentioned about, but I also think the job got hard again. And it got hard for probably the first time since 2011. And there's very few people like you or me who were working on site at that time and who experienced the great financial crisis. And we've had a bull market for so long. that I forget who said this, but I've adopted it for myself. This idea of like the tide goes out and you find out who's wearing like swimming, who's wearing pants.
Right.
There's a lot of people who weren't wearing pants.
Right.
Because the gap between good management and small management shrinks when the market's really good. We've had a year and a half, 2 years now of a really challenging market, and that gap widens both within organizations and across the industry. And what I heard from people on site a lot is like, I need help, and they're trapped in situations where the regional manager maybe can't help them because the regional manager also,
They're overwhelmed.
well, it's overwhelmed, and they also haven't had to solve those problems before.
That's it.
So they're locked. Like, I need traffic, and
Yeah. And I agree to all that. And I think you make a great point, kind of taking the baton from where I left it in 2021, is to say, okay, 2021 into 22, the market turned, right? Got difficult for a lot of different reasons. And I don't even want to say the job got hard again. I think it got very difficult in a unique way, because ultimately residents and even employees were coming out of the last 2 years of a very frustrating, confusing time. And many, let's be honest, lost family members and other things that happened during the pandemic. And so they're just dealing with a lot of things, which I think sort of doubled down. I know it's something we'll talk about a little bit on the emotional health and how everybody was doing, right? We like to ask, how are you doing? We expect only one answer, good.
or
Right?
busy. That's
Right. So good, busy, great. But the reality is that's not the real answers, right? And you and I both know that. And people just don't leave great companies or healthy careers unless things are not good, right? And the thing is also, and you're connected on site, I still try to remain very connected even in this role, is there's a lot of warning signs, just like any relationship, that things are going bad. And it's usually not overnight. It's over a duration of time. But if you have parties in that relationship that are unaware or disconnected to those elements of what's not going right, or I think in our industry sometimes it could be like, no, everything's fine, right? It's that meme of like, this is fine, everything's fine, until it's not.
Yeah.
And 2021 came, and now it's gotten very difficult. Occupancies aren't where they used to be. The tech stack is larger than ever before, and the teams are overwhelmed. They don't have the support and training that they need to be able to get there. And to your point, we've shifted a lot of people into leadership positions, specifically middle management leader positions, that maybe were ready, maybe weren't, but they surely are struggling with having the support that they need to elevate their career, not only for them, but to help their teams elevate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, I was very fortunate with some of the people I worked with earlier in my career. I've talked about that on previous episodes here, that, I had some people who seemingly had the answer to every question. And that's just, and that's because they'd been through multiple recessions. They've been through, they'd seen downturns.
The essence of experience.
Which, when I don't know about you, but when I was 25 and people talked to me about experience, I was so annoyed.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'll be fine. Now at 41, it's like, okay, I get it now. Like, all the people who told me, it's like that like, dad was right meme.
They are.
Like, don't necessarily want to accept it when you're young, but then as you get older, you start to realize that.
Well, I think when you're young, you have a bravado, you have an ignorance, you have a naivete to you, and you also think you can outsmart it.
Yeah.
And you being much smarter than I mean, you probably dealt with some of that, but I could relate in a lot of ways. Like, you know what? Work smarter, not harder. I've come to embrace something, I've said very often over the years, is work smarter and harder.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality.
Well, that takes into maybe an interesting little tangent, and then we can circle back to like maybe solutions for the burnout. But because you mentioned the work harder idea, and I think I may have said this to you a little bit in advance, but I talked about this once before. I've really realized in the past 4 or 5 years that working hard is table stakes. Like, if you wanna succeed, like, if you have to work hard. But as I've looked at the people around me and I've looked at my career and what's kind of defined the success I've had, the defining characteristic isn't hard work, it's sacrifice. I'm not going to be up to date on Game of Thrones because I'm going to an industry event. I used to, 2016, 17, in Austin went on what I called the circuit every month, which was a Rika luncheon, a Rika happy hour, a ULI breakfast, 2 ULI happy hours. I was in IROM. I was president of IROM at the time. I just had stuff going on constantly, and I didn't have
And I want to add something to that because if I was to guess, because I was doing a lot of that at the same time, just different things, right?
Yeah.
It was time away from friends or family or other things that you wanted to do because you knew pouring into certain events and building your network in person and maybe online, but definitely in person in these events, we just felt at the time that it would be beneficial long term. And that's why
Yep.
we did a lot of it. And what I was going to say to you is, I'm curious because I was asked all the time, why do you do all this, Tony? Like, why don't you just do your job, go home, and not do anything extra? And I my only answer when I was younger was to say, like, I feel like I have a lot to give, right? A lot more to give back, just in regards to ideas, creativity, ways of doing things. And I just felt like it was somewhat my duty in this industry as a leader to participate in a volunteer capacity to help. And not everyone has that obligation or feels that obligation. I sense you also felt that in a lot of ways, and I also sense you also were asked that question a lot by maybe friends or family. They're like, "Why are you doing all this? Like, you're never around." Like, to your point of sacrifice, they were seeing it. They didn't really understand it, but now maybe they see the benefit of it now in your career.
Yeah, I would say it's something I talked about a lot, and but this was back mainly at the Roscoe days, sort of 2010. I got my
Yeah.
CPM when I still worked on site,
Yeah.
and I reported directly to Angelique Goodenough, who's my mentor, the smartest person I've ever met in this business. Very fortunate to work for her, but and she was very pro IRAM. Part of it, I would say, is actually a little bit of insecurity and ego reinforcement. Of I actually developed esteem of being involved in these organizations, and especially early in my career, and having some great people there who took me under their wings, where I was like, oh, my opinion matters, or like I think I'm smart, but now I'm having other people like affirm that and let me know that I have something to contribute, and it built a lot of confidence that I don't know I would have had otherwise.
I think you make a great point, and I would absolutely agree as I reflect on it. I probably haven't taken the time to really reflect on that particular point. I think it's for anyone listening or watches this on playback, that are like, because I get asked a lot, and I think you do too, and maybe we get into it, is how do I progress my career? How do I grow my career? And I think oftentimes we live in a society now that wants like overnight success, right? Like how do I get that next job in 30 days, right? And like, is there a 10-step program that I could do to get that? Right? We hear that all the time. The reality is the answer is no. But I think you make a great point is sometimes in your organization or your company, um, you're valued to the extent that your supervisor sees your opinion valuable. And I think we've all been in situations, or you and I in our careers, and I'm not saying even now, but I'm saying over the years, that I'm not sure my opinion was always valued to the extent that I could provide value. And so because of that, I sensed that, I knew that. And so I contributed with other non-paying organizations, right?
Yep.
Whether it be the IRAMs or apartment associations or whatever the case is, to where I felt I was heard and I was valued. And so I spent time there, especially when I was with organizations at the time, years back, that maybe undervalued my potential or undervalued really what I brought to the table. I then transitioned, in a volunteer capacity to help in those other ways, because that was also growing me, edifying me. And when you start speaking about what you believe, it starts to crystallize what you do believe. A lot of people, even podcasts, right? Like a lot of people come on here and like, you ask them questions, you're like, well, I haven't really thought about that. But the more you think about things, the more you unpack their leadership perspectives and things like that, the more they crystallize and you understand what you really believe, and then you stand on principle, and then you can proceed from there. So I think you make a great point.
Everything's different when you hear it echo back,
Right.
from someone else, or even just like talking to yourself,
Right.
which would sound make some people might think it's crazy, but I used to do a lot when I was preparing to teach or public speaking. Is the words feel different when they're actually fully formed,
when they're out there.
And-
I mean,
and
for
they're
me,
out
it's
there.
for me that is like memes and quotes.
Yep.
Years back in the pandemic, I would read them. I always enjoyed quotes, but then I got to thinking, I was like, I have a few things I have to say. I have a few opinions about what's going on now. I'm gonna scribble them down on an app and put them out to the public, and let it be what it is. Today, it's a fun motivator of others, but really at the end of the day, it's just me seeing my own thoughts on digital paper.
Yep.
And it reaffirms what I believe, and I often, it may sound braggadocious in some ways. I in a lot of ways, when I'm sitting down here or on panels at conferences, I refer back to my own quotes, because ultimately, not that there's some brilliant quote, but they're my own thoughts,
Yeah.
that have now crystallized into
or
my own beliefs.
they took a a larger idea and shrunk it down into something digestible. I mentioned Angelique earlier. I speak in Angelique when I'm talking like industry stuff. I'll catch myself saying things like "we sell time in a box," and those are all direct isms from her. But those early in my career helped form things. Or another one of my favorites,
and even now,
yeah, is oh, absolutely. And another one of my favorites that it's funny at ResProd, people would quote these back to me before I would say them because I'd see them coming because I say them all the time. But another one from a gentleman named Ray Baca who taught my Iron Finance coursework said, "Good managers manage expenses, great managers create revenue." And that was such a profound phrase for me.
And it's a big shift, but it's a subtle shift.
Yep, because it's and for those who don't necessarily get that, I'll just explain it really quick. Things cost what they cost, and at some point, if you keep cutting expenses, you start doing it to the detriment of the property. You're deferring maintenance, the property starts to degrade, and then that causes bigger issues. Kind of your point, but there's no, it's never a single pebble that causes an issue with the property. It's 1,000 of them that back up
over time
and build up over time. It's a sequence of bad decisions, not one. So those you can only get so low. So if you really want to be great, you find ways to create more revenue, and that's usually in attacking vacancy loss and operating in the gray.
Yeah, it's elevated strategy and getting the most out of your marketing campaigns, your strategies, and let's be honest, it's getting the most out of motivating your people to be their best, and that's a big part of this business.
And teaching and maybe bringing that weave back to people feeling like they're prepared to succeed and being given an opportunity to win and supported is, I think we do a poor job as an industry teaching people their actual jobs when they work on site. Because the job, ultimately, this, having been in the business a while and the different roles you've had, the job is in a lot, right?
At the end of the day.
At the end of the day. It's not occupancy, it's not retention, it's not, at the end of the day, it's NOI.
It's a profitable business.
But we don't talk about NOI nearly as often as we probably should. And we definitely don't have it be we turn, I've gotten obsessed recently with this idea of measures and targets. There's an economist who, Goodhart is his last name. He has a law from the 70s called Goodhart's Law. And it's when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So, and you see that manifest all over the world in different things. It's part of what, so when you're aiming for something that should just guide you and let you know if you're actually on the path to your target, you start to optimize for that other thing. So you optimize for occupancy, or you optimize for lease trade out, and you do that to the detriment often of the actual goal.
Well, and it's actually in some ways, in a different way, the point I was going to make is where the training really comes in this business. Oftentimes, even if it's done well, is we focus on those targets or those specific tactics, right? Or specific, shall I say, benchmarks, right? We train to the benchmark or to the expectations, versus taking a step back and saying, all right, we're running a small business, and the goal of a small business is to offset expenses and grow revenues, right? Now, we can call whatever acronym, if NOI is confusing to you, then whatever the case is, but let me describe it to you in a training fashion in its most simplest way. You're running a small business, and you want to grow the bottom line revenues, and how do you do that? Is it through occupancy? Is it through, and typically it's not primarily through cost cutting. Right?
Yeah, almost never.
And I will say, just from being on site and operating, we'll call it small businesses, but essentially properties, is cutting expenses is the obvious, right? Is actually, in my opinion, sort of lacks creativity, right? So if you want to say, okay, we can cut here, we can cut here, owners and clients expect you to look at those things and get as lean as you possibly can.
It's table stakes, like hard work, right? Like if I used to, I did a lot of management changes and business development, and I would tell people, they were like, well, next year's budget, I want to cut this. I was like, if I can cut that much, like, you should fire me, because I should already be optimized when it comes to expenses as best I can, because that's my fiduciary responsibility as your agent.
And ultimately, to drive revenues and think outside the box and be creative, and sort of maximize your strategies and your campaigns and your people, is actually very difficult, and it's the work, and it's highlighted during these tough economic times. Who can do it better and who can't? And ultimately, I don't think many of us in this business and many leaders that are on the come up, property managers, regional managers, have really been taught and trained and supported in this entrepreneurial fashion. It's been more tactical, more job checklist stuff. Because I think there's been a perception that maybe property managers and regional managers can't comprehend more entrepreneurial thoughts and creativity in solving business problems, but I think they're wrong.
I agree that they're wrong. My experience has always been people rise to the bar you set for them, provided you put a ladder next to the bar that helps them get to it the first time. Because you can't just say like, here's the goal.
How do I get there?
And if they've never gotten to that goal before, it's just mean.
Well,
right?
yeah, and it happens frankly all the time. It's just a hope that, and I hear it in back rooms too. It's like, well, they need to figure it out. There's part of connecting dots, sure, but you have to give them some experience, some guardrails, some direction, maybe a ladder. Maybe you don't show them how to open the ladder, but here's a ladder. You may need to figure it out, and it's going to help you achieve your goal.
Or recognize that they've tried the 9 things they know how to try, and your job as a leader is to go give them numbers 10, 11, 12, and 13.
Right, the other 9 things that maybe they haven't tried, but that's predicated on your experience, and hopefully you have it.
Another great ism that I love, I speak of them all the time when my brain gets going multifamily, is the people on site have all the answers. As a leader, it's up to you to go there and ask the right questions.
And I'll tell you, 1,000% true. So if you're not sure what's going on or what strategy to put together for a client or an owner, spend some time with your team on site, ask them a lot of questions, not in a way that's, that they're scared or nervous that they're going to be in trouble, but really in a probing way on how do you improve this business. And you're right. In this role, it's a nationally visible role. I get to pop in and, say hi to teams and encourage them, and just my very presence sometimes encourages them, which, is still wild to me. But what I try to do is spend a little bit of time talking to them about the challenges in the market. What are they seeing happening? Because that's helpful for me. Now, if you're an operator in that local market, you should be spending a lot of time doing that weekly, monthly, especially if you're in a tough, financial situation for your asset. You need to be, and I'll tell you, anybody listening at a regional level or regional vice president level, if you can speak with specificity about details of what's happening on site or some feedback that you've gotten from comps or even your team, clients are going to really appreciate that. They expect you to dig into your business. And so if you're not doing that,
it's not a job you can do from a desk. And,
you really can.
And you have to be on site multiple times a week. I remember, meetings with all the regional managers at companies sitting around the table, and anyone who was trending below like 92, 93, it was what's happening in your property. And it didn't take very long for people to figure out that these meetings were on Tuesday. You need to have an answer by Tuesday. So what do you spend Monday doing is talking to all your PMs and understanding what's going on, because otherwise it was not going to be a fun meeting for you.
And I think really quickly in those meetings, senior leaders can assess who is connected to their site and who wasn't.
Very quickly.
Who was prepared and who wasn't.
Who's been there?
Right. Because spending time there, who's getting the answers, and they're going to be able to convey in those meetings without notes. I mean, they may have some notes, some statistics or whatever the case is, but they'll be able to speak off the cuff because they know it, because they spend a lot of time there.
Yeah, one thing I find myself telling young people in the industry a lot, or maybe one of those things I think people know, but they don't know, is that we're in the business of think breaking.
That's why we have jobs.
You can't prevent. If a pipe bursts, you can't prevent it. And success is really about how you react to it. And in third-party management, and with your bosses as well, trust is built not when things are going well, but when they're chaotic and going really challenging.
Yeah, I just yesterday, I defined in my mind as I see it, hard work, work ethic isn't about when things are going well. A great work ethic is actually when nothing is going your way, right? And that's when you continue to go at it, and that's when you build trust with clients. It's like, listen, I know it's not going our way, but I'm not going to give up. I'm going to continue to bring ideas to the table that I think are based out of reality and based on feedback that I'm getting in the marketplace or from my teams. And that's what clients expect. Now, the reality is, hopefully most clients are respectful and professional, and they appreciate all those sorts of things. So we'd like to think in the third-party world they're all that, but there's a lot of financial stress on everybody, including them, especially them. And so we understand.
And that's the other kind of side of that coin for people who do work on site or regionals to remember, especially if you work. My favorite clients often have been the small family offices, or like a group of 3 guys who got together and pooled some money, and their brother-in-law and their aunt and their grandmother, and that's, or their colleagues from their former doctor's office, whatever it is, are all investing in this. And some people like, I've heard people on site or regional say, why this owner's all over me and they call me all the time. And that's partly your fault, because there's something they're missing on the communication side, and also maybe setting some boundaries and saying, I'm not going to talk to you on Saturday. like unless
Yeah.
unless the building's on fire. But also having some empathy in that conversation and recognizing that they're under a lot of stress too. Like people forget that these properties are, on the low end 10, 20 million, on the high end 200, 250 million dollars. When you're sort of deal with high rises or more than that sometimes.
Yeah.
If it's a small family office who bought their first nice property, they're stressed.
Yeah, there's financial stress, there's emotional stress. I mean, maybe those go hand in hand. But I think it just, I think it comes down to just over communication, building. I think you said it very well. I mean, setting boundaries as well as far as expectations, and I think that's a whole nother world as far as a whole nother show about how asset managers and clients can better support senior leadership, even on the third party side, to get more results. Is it being there more frequently and kind of microing the process? I think there's probably an argument for it or against it for sure. But it's a tough situation financially and emotionally.
Well, and I think because we're dealing with humans, every single one,
not robots yet.
Yeah, not yet. Everyone's different. Like everyone's had their own experiences. They all have their own wins. They've all had their own hot buttons. Whether it's a client, it's why why I love third party management. It's why I really. It was the first reason I fell in love with this business. The second reason was I had this epiphany that we provide people's homes, and that's a tremendous responsibility. But then on the original thing was I figured out how people made money investing in real estate, and specifically in apartments. And then I very quickly after that realized, oh, there's like a million ways to do this. Like there's not just one set way to accomplish the goal, and every owner has different ways of doing that. So it's every property is its own unique puzzle. Every team is made up of its own unique people. And I would love to see the industry over time, and AI will probably help allow this. But not replacing people, but getting to where you can actually have a true bespoke custom management operating plan for each property, as opposed to the bit of cookie cutter that we see today.
Yeah, it's a cool point that you make. I mean, and ultimately, I think incredibly true. I mean, it takes a lot of creativity and time vested into that unique business plan and marketing plan for each asset, because based on how it's financed and how it's ran within the context of the market that it's in, there's so many elements. And I think you and I hear it all the time on the supplier side. Is like, especially if you're new to this business, wow, there's so many elements of this business, and I didn't realize it was as complex as it is. And because of that, it's going to take a unique game plan and business plan to be successful on site.
Well, and let me come back to one of our original topics on the too much tech, which I always feel weird talking about because I left ops and working for management companies, go start a tech company. So I'm the furthest thing from anti-tech. But I feel that, and I've written about this a couple of times, that in our pursuit of making the job easy, we've made it complex. Like we've actually made an individual task easier. Like I don't have to take a bank bag to the bank anymore. If I screw up a ledger, I can fix it. Right? Like it's not like the Yardi of the 70s and 80s or MRI, or the 80s and 90s of MRI. You can do a lot more now. But at the same time, we now have a point solution for everything. I've heard that from several leaders at management companies that across their company, they use 30 plus softwares. And it's taken training especially for site staff, and shifted it from a focus on how to do your job well, and how to be a great manager, how to sell, how to manage teams, what maintenance is,
the human element.
Yeah, the actual job, and like what's pushing NOI, and it shifted to check these boxes, use the software. Here's how you navigate a CRM.
I think there's and I just want to, I'm from Silicon Valley, California. That's where I was born and raised, and so I grew up in a tech culture as someone young and in high school, and all my friends went to Stanford and Berkeley.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm the bottom of the hockey stick for early adopters. I have a freaking humane pen.
So early on in my operational career, I had a great respect, and I still do, for technology and what it was doing to help us. And I think the intention always, and sometimes I'll talk about this, is that sometimes we overcomplicated it and some of these other things that you touched on, but ultimately technology, a couple of things. It's important for operators, if you're listening. First and foremost, it's not going anywhere. So let's not pretend like, oh, things are going to go back to the way they were. They never will. Business always moves forward. The world moves forward.
this is not me saying I think we should eliminate it. I think we just need to be more intentional about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And by no means was that the
Yeah.
point that I thought you made either. I think you made a very good point. But ultimately, technology is there to help our jobs become somewhat easier. But I also think that there's just been this era, pandemic, post-pandemic in our industry, that I do think that there's a lot of tech suppliers that see this massive opportunity to just run in and start to sort of speak the industry and say my tech is the best, right? And by pure volume, I think decision makers are overwhelmed by all the tech options, and ultimately probably have made some mistakes in rolling out way too long and too large of a tech stack for their site teams. But I think there's another element that I think is the elephant in the room in a lot of ways is who's on site. Typically, let's be honest, this business is a blue collar business, right? And so
People fell into it.
understanding that technology language is a language in and of itself. And you and I both know, if you've studied any language, it's predicated on sort of foundational principles, and you build up as you learn more nuances of the language. Same with technology. Technology is a language, social media is a language, marketing is a language. All of it is, for lack of a better term, some sort of language, and technology is that. And so I think we've just sometimes put it right onto our site team members, and this is a blue collar industry, right? So complex technologies with multiple passwords and multiple integrations, and we're still, as an industry, I think, trying to improve in our training and support. So while we're still trying to play catch up there, we've now landed tech on top of a group of folks that maybe are tech forward, maybe aren't. Like, define for yourself. And so then we step back and say, why is it not working? Why is it not integrating smoothly? Well, there's a lot of issues that we need to address. That and ultimately it's one step at a time. And I think you need to address the first step before you can address the fourth step.
Yeah, well, I agree, and I think I look a lot at in addition to digitizing a lot of the jobs, we also digitize training simultaneously. Most companies have moved away from classroom training. When I ran training departments, it was only classroom training, and that was very specific for me. I just formed this belief from taking digital classes that it's not the same experience.
I want to give a shout out real quick to that point that you made. I actually do want to give a shout out to RPM, and I'm always mindful here, but obviously, I just came out of a leadership orientation class that was in person for 2 days. And I also want to give another shout out to a lot of leaders within RPM that actually create what we call sort of office hours in their department. It's still digital, but it's a more conversational way to ask questions that you don't feel you can't ask in a classroom setting, even if it's a digital classroom setting, or shall I say virtual, or even an in-person. It's a little more of an intimate, almost like a college counselor that you go see and talk to and ask a question. So I do sense that there's companies, and I don't think you're poo-pooing on the industry or companies. I do think that companies, RPM being one of them, and others that are saying, okay, like, how can we find this balance of in-person and virtual training to help get our teams up to speed?
So I would say I am poo-pooing on the industry. Now,
I was trying to give you more. I was trying to give you a little more credence, but
no, I mean, I think it's important to call it what it is and say that there's a lot of people who do it really poorly. Now, it's not surprising me to hear that RPM is doing it well or pushing there, because so I led training there for 3.5 years. We had less than 1,000 units when I went into that role.
Great.
I had a 3-person team, like including myself, where we had less than 5,000 units. Like, that's obscene for most companies. But it was, Jason's always had this recognition that between him and Angelique, that the people were what mattered. And we say it all the time, this is a people business. But our actions very rarely reflect that as an industry at large. So I love the office hours idea. That's a great way to keep people accessible, especially if you have a portfolio distributed across multiple cities or kind of a widespread region. It's a way to be there. And when I'm a big believer as a leader that part of your job is creating a forum for discussion where people can rely on it being there. Because if you, otherwise it makes your job chaotic, because you're just dealing with things as they pop into people's heads. And if you can say, hey, unless it's an emergency, we can cover this Tuesday, then they can trust, and it gives them peace of mind.
Right, and I think you make a great point about the forum. I mean, you ultimately want to create a culture, to where they can ask these questions, and ultimately, I think it leads to actually peer-to-peer training, which I think is the secret sauce to actual training. Is that obviously you have formalized virtual training or in-person training, but ultimately, can you equip and strengthen and empower seasoned leaders within your organization to act as brand ambassadors or peer trainers? And I think if you do that well and you're able to retain those individuals, I think your business, whether it be our business or any other business, is going to sustain itself and probably be able to be very successful.
So I have this crazy idea, at one of many, related to that though, that I'd love to get your take on. I had this when I was EVP at Linden. It's owner operator. We were small at the time. We were planning to buy some deals. Ended up kind of flipping that game plan to selling. But I came up with this idea of programmatic training or documented training, probably a better way to put it, that would take place for anyone who was a supervisor and had people who work for them with your team. And the amount you were required to do each week would scale up based on role. So a property manager would need to document 4 hours of training with their team a week, whether that's shadowing a leasing agent or working with an APM. Or
so it could be dynamic training. Does that
Yeah.
be like sit down classroom?
Yeah, it's not a sit down classroom. It's job shadowing, apprentice, mentor-esque training on site, which doesn't happen that much. If you're a regional, it was 8 hours a week, and so that's going to your sites.
It would just elevate the hours.
Yep, and then it would be for a level up, it's 16 for like a VP, because every hour you pour into someone, that's saving hours down the road. And I was trying to figure out a way how to make that cultural, but also make it measurable and something that you could enforce essentially. And that's the best I came up with.
What I'll say is I like it in theory, right? And the reality is I think higher executives, the challenge for them is the amount of time and bandwidth that they have, right? So it's already limited because you're up there and you have to make a lot of decisions. You're pulled in 1,000 directions. So as the hours trickle up and grow, and the higher you are,
at some point it would have to plateau or maybe or go away, maybe at certain spots.
Because the CEO would come and say, "Well, how many hours do I got to do every week?"
Well, yeah. Well, Jason doesn't know how to log into your.
But
I get your point.
But the point is, yeah, I mean, it's going to elevate. And I don't.
However, what does that person actually do most of the time? A lot of times it's teaching, right? Again, it's like what do we view as training? It's when you're running a meeting, you're giving feedback and answers and direction. That's teaching. So it's a reframing of what you're doing.
It's a shift. I mean, it's a paradigm shift.
And part of the reason I came up with this was I was looking at where I was spending my time, and where my regionals were spending their time, and I felt like they were firefighting a lot, and they were coming in and they were solving something, but they were the ones solving it, as opposed to teaching how to solve it for next time. And I would see this like reciprocal cycle of
the same thing.
You're doing the same 2 hours for this person every month.
Well, and I think as you probably dug even further, you saw that maybe even the initial fire could have been prevented or been a small grass fire versus a mountain fire with better training support or experience to understand like this is how you put that small grass fire out before it comes a huge mountain blaze.
And when you do it again by creating the forum, then you of having like, hey, I'm gonna spend an hour with my manager, each of my managers every week.
Shared knowledge being shared with peer groups
and that over time, yes, it's a big time investment. It feels like, I've made the joke, everyone's busy in the industry, right? So there's never a good time, whether that's professional education or developing your team. You have to create the time, and if you do that on the long tail, it ends up.
I think it's a matter of perspectives, creating a culture within your company, and also a culture of accountability. And I'll use many know I have four kids. I have a 15-year-old, 12-year-old, 9-year-old, and a new baby, almost 6 months. And if I don't spend 18 years, right, or more, pouring into them to be a good human on a lot of those nuanced, life situations. On the back end, I'm going to pay for it as potentially an early grandfather, or they're going to make a lot of bad decisions that I am going to beat my head against the wall and say, how are you making that? Ultimately, the finger, frankly, what do they say? Point less, fingers and more thumbs, right?
Yeah.
That's on you, Dad, right? That's on you, leader, to, this is your team, this is your people, and did you invest the time in those small conversations to train and teach them how they could have avoided the current situation, but be on the lookout for the future situation because they're going to have a lot of similar signs.
Yeah, well, humans are weird, right? Like we have to touch the stove to some extent, right? Like it's that whole experience.
Now that you've touched it, right? You felt it doesn't feel good, right? And you're going to have this feeling again in the future. You want to know what to do with this feeling and maybe how to use that energy better.
But the other, I've actually heard Alex Hormozy talk quite well about this, but you also have to correct the action in the moment. You also have to reward the action in the moment. And so as a leader, if you're letting time pass between this happened and went wrong and you recognizing it and addressing it, then you don't actually get the benefit of correlating like the mistake with the correction.
Well, and the reality, I think, in this business, because it is firefighting, and we've just embraced that this is what it is. When the reality is, I think the point that we're making today is,
Doesn't have to
does it have to be? No, I don't think it
Absolutely not.
does. And because it's that, we're always busy or overwhelmed or over our skis, and so we can't get to things in a timely fashion, and therefore address it in that moment. We address it weeks later, or on an annual or quarterly review, whatever the case is, and that moment's passed. The lesson to
Lesson's
learn
gone.
is gone.
Yep.
And that mistake is often then repeated, and it's almost a cycle of that nonstop for 20 years of your career.
Well, and like and that's not just negative; it's also positive. It's like when someone does
Totally
something well, like right in that
It's
moment.
not, that was
Yeah.
awesome, and this is why. And
Yeah.
I used to tell my teams all the time is, we talk a lot about what's not working, right? Because you're that way in business. Like, okay, what problems do we need to solve? But what's working? What do we do that's winning? And let's double down on that. Let's take a moment to recognize those components of what's working, and let's do more of those things, right?
Yep.
And that's valuable content to a client and others to say, we see that this is really effective. We're going to continue to do this and maybe make some adjustments along the way, but we want to continue to do effective strategies that continue to provide us results.
Absolutely. Well, and that comes back to what we were talking about earlier with the people on site have the answers, and is as a regional, as a VP, taking that curious approach of saying, I probably have a solution, but let me come in, or maybe also not resting on your laurels when things are going well, right? Things you can always find ways to improve, and taking that curious attitude of what's working, what's not, as opposed to this is bad, fix it. You get a different, again, it's a minor shift, but it could have a huge impact in terms of fostering relationships, making people feel supported.
I think ultimately it's just sort of the principle of trajectory, right? So
Yep.
it's a minor shift, but the trajectory long term is huge.
Well, and what is supported, right? So a lot of people, like I'm a big fan of Fuse. I remember pitching it before I knew it existed. The concept to the regional president for Alliance at the time.
Yeah.
We had lunch, and I was like, I have this idea for training. And I described it. She was like, oh yeah, that's Fuse. We use it. And I was like, of course.
Is that Tina?
It was Stephanie Nashimino.
That's it.
Yeah. Sorry, Stephanie. And she was like, oh, it's Fuse. So I was like, okay, cool. Well, I've seen other companies where that's been implemented sometimes where it's, well, we support them, it's all there. It's like, well, that's not support.
Right.
Right.
Support.
It's
a resource.
Correct. It's a resource. It's there, but it's not support. Support's knowing that when you're in trouble, someone's got your back to help you get out of it. And it's as much of like a feeling and like in confidence that I can call Tony, and Tony is gonna, maybe not that moment, but some point the next day, like come see me, talk to me, help me solve the problem, and if he doesn't know the answer, he'll know who to
It'll
ask.
help me to find
Yeah, he'll know who to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote something not that long ago, sort of one of these quote things is hard work doesn't deter hardworking people. And really the end was toxicity does. But ultimately, you could fill in anything there. Like hard work doesn't deter hardworking people, lack of support does, or whatever the case is. I mean, most in this industry, again, being blue collar, strong work ethic, they're willing to grind it out, but only for so long, right? And so if they don't have that culture or that level of support, it's a matter of time so they're going to start looking for other options and potentially other industries maybe.
Well, and recognizing when we have a unique ability to kind of forecast to some extent when a property is going to be in trouble. In terms just from like a labor standpoint and workload. It's like, hey, they got a bunch of work orders.
There's a ton of metrics. I mean, I think our business is built as a future projection industry in a lot of ways. I mean, trending reports, trending occupancies, staffing, all sorts of things. I think we're trying to predict the next 30 to 60 days.
And I'll give you somewhere where I wish it was more dynamic. On maintenance, we've on site, we've adopted this. We'll fix it in house perspective when it comes to things like HVAC to save money. And if you have to replace an HVAC person, that takes 2 people. Now, if you have 50 open work orders and an AC comes in, I would argue it's better to contract out that AC, even if it's just a service call, and not even spend the time to go and triage
At that
it.
point, you're evaluating time and money.
Exactly. And well, there's certain things I can pay someone to do, and there's things I can't pay someone to do. And while the things I can't pay someone to do, it's the drawer that's stuck or whatever that is, or the door that won't open, or the lock that's fidgety, that we think, oh, it's not an emergency. But then that not an emergency gets pushed a week, longer. And for that resident, it becomes an emergency.
And ultimately, they make a decision in that moment with a drawer that doesn't work.
To stay or go.
I'm not going to renew next
Yep.
time.
And they and because it is perceived as something easy, they get that much more upset about it. It's like how
it falls to the bottom because
and stuff keeps getting piled on top of it.
And so I think this is the level of understanding from a leadership standpoint that even property managers and maintenance supervisors need to understand, like, how do we prioritize these things, and how do we make, because a lot of properties are in a pinch right now that they're cash tight, and obviously they can't really spend money on anything else. But pick your poison, right?
Yeah. If a move out's going to cost you $5,000, and that for $300,
But I think this is where senior leaders need to help.
Mid-level
Absolutely. Leaders understand and how to break these things down and correlate costs to them, because what do clients understand? What do owners and investors understand? The financials, costs. So if we could break that down and to say, listen, this is how we could prioritize the work. There is some cost involved. There's always cost involved. Turnover costs, vacancy costs, but also costs to help, to fix emergency situations or HVAC. Is it best for my two guys to spend all day, a day and a half, while all the other work orders on the back end that potentially could lead to resident
are going to pile up also, so it just gets worse.
But I do think that senior leaders need to help create formulas and breakdowns for site team members and regional managers to convey some of these things to higher level asset managers and clients, so that and typically asset managers and clients are very smart, sophisticated folks, and so I think they'll understand the financial breakdown and say, okay, well, that you make logical sense, and I'm willing to approve that, or whatever the case is. That's very fair, but typically that argument's not being made to them, and oftentimes that's not even being elevated to them.
Well, we're not, and a lot of times I think it's because we haven't taught regionals what they need to know to be necessarily always in that situation. The best regionals are translators. They translate ownership goals.
They're a liaison between asset and property.
And you can speak both languages. And because of that, you're able to translate those things, and you recognize the ripples between what happens at a property, and you can describe and explain those, which is going back to my crazy training idea of everyone teaching, is when you have that forum regularly, you find that those are the moments where you can teach that nuance, right? Because it's hard to fit that in a class. So you have to be there and be pushing it and sharing it. To get
I love the forum idea. I think probably where it gets a little dicey is when you allocate hours to it. I think you're going to scare our senior leaders on the numerical hours that the expectation is. But I do think the open forum and the consistency of training and the amount of time that needs to be invested into training, I think there's a lot of arguments to be made.
Yeah, I think if you just gave people some examples of here's what we mean by teaching and training.
Well, and here's an example of the last 30 days of the conversations that you have, most of which could have been solved with proactive support,
or spending the extra hour then to not just solve it, but to teach it so that you don't have to come back.
And I think in our industry, when you hear the T word training, it's systems training.
Yeah,
there's a lot more training and mentorship,
and that's the problem is systems training is what we train, and we need to get more not just leadership, but just training. How a property works training. The number of people who don't connect move outs with maintenance, or move outs with lower revenue because they aren't thinking about the
I genuinely
days
think
vacant and the
I genuinely think on site that these concepts that you're just referring to, like the move outs, the work orders, occupancy, are seen in absolute silos.
Yep, and that's maybe that's been the kind of theme of the episode a bit, is the siloing of the industry, which point solutions and tech have also fueled to some extent. And that's not just within a property, that's also within an organization where marketing's doing things that get top of funnel activity, but that's not necessarily correlating to leases. So
bottom line ROI.
And then there's something like brand that's its own thing, right? It's much longer term.
Story of my life.
But making, recognizing that each property is unique, and that every decision that's made affects every decision that's going to come in the future. That nothing happens in a vacuum. But because we have all these the benefit of data is we have all these KPIs. The downfall of data is you have all these KPIs, and you have people who aren't trained strategically to interpret all of that data, so they freeze, or they're very well intentioned, they try hard and they're making decisions, but they're not equipped to make the right decision. So it's not their fault, but often they make that incorrect decision. And I would love as an industry for us to just find ways to be more cross-functional, find ways to break these silos down, and really on site recognize that we have incredible people who work in this industry. And if we give them the tools and the support and the training, and recognize that like software is a tool, it's not a solution. The tool is only as valuable as the skill of the person wielding it. Like give me a chisel and a hammer, and I'm gonna not make anything. Give it to Michelangelo, and you get incredible art, right? It's all about the skill of the user. So we need to skill up, and we need to recognize that people are capable.
I think there's, the theme of today feels as though like, we have an industry that's kind of, this is how we've always done it. And I think there's still a lot of folks in leadership capacity that embrace that and are okay with that because that's the industry they grew up in. And I think for us to go forward as an industry and start to change some of the metrics that we don't like to see from turnover to some of these other things we talked about today. I think it's flipping the system on its head in some ways and reimagining and re-looking at how do we support our teams and how do we get them successful on the ground. And I think a lot of our discussion today is equipping them not only just through training and define training. That's not just systems training, right?
Yeah.
This is an array of mentorship, leadership support, all these sorts of things. And if you
It
do
never
that
stops.
and you spend and allocate the appropriate amount of time, which is often heavy on the front side, you're going to see the financial payout of these assets, and clients are going to be happy. Teams love to win, right? Yep. Teams hate to be underwater all the time, and so I think that'll also speak to lower turnover numbers on staff and these other things, which I think was your essential question: is like how do you get teams to stop leaving? I think it's a lot of these things, because if you create an environment to where they're winning, they feel supported, they know what they're doing, they feel empowered, and they're becoming subject matter experts. Why would they go anywhere as long as you're paying them fairly? Market value, and they're not going to go anywhere.
And I will say, even though I'm a big fan of these programs, that's not a reward or like an award that goes on their desk. It's not like a gift card appreciation day. We've spent millions as an industry on those sorts of things, which
don't get me started.
Which I like, right? Like I put together the awards program.
They're nice.
They're nice to do, but they're not
cherries on top.
But they're not. But exactly. And I think a lot of times we will do those as a company and say, look what I'm doing. And it's like, yeah, but every other day they feel like they're behind.
And let's address the elephant in the room. I mean, sometimes across our industry, you say, well, I'm going to give Michelle an award because she's just been underwater for the last year, and so it's like an empathy award to say you're doing a great job. But the reality is, we gave this to you not because actually,
to make myself feel better.
It's like a hazard pay. It's a hazard award to say like you've hung in there, and we appreciate that. Here's some crystal. I mean, really, what Michelle wants,
is to not be underwater.
Not be underwater. She wants more support. She wants more training. She wants to feel like she's winning, and that would mean a lot more than a crystal award. So awards are nice, but
yes, they're nice, but they're not the difference.
They're not going to solve
I think it starts with onboarding and just continues through. I know we're running out of time, but we're now 3 for 3. Actually, we had one question last week, so
okay.
One day we'll get that figured out. But I would love to, kind of final thoughts from you, and thank you again for the time. I think we accomplished our goal of talking about the things that not enough people are talking about. Hopefully shining a light on.
I think at the end of the day, like that's what I try to do as much as I possibly can. I think that's what that you do. We go about it in different ways, and just I think in conclusion, I think it's important for leaders to speak up more, right? Everybody's asking for thought leaders to rise. Being a thought leader ultimately says you have to say some things that maybe don't make everyone happy, right? You have to be careful within your organization. Don't go pissing people off. But
which is ultimately why I knew I had some pretty inflammatory things I wanted to say. It's why I left.
Yeah, I mean, you got to say what you got to say, and you got to be mindful. Obviously, our team's an amazing company, and I represent it in probably the most visible way, maybe in the business, right? So, but for the most part, I mean, they're very supportive. They trust me. They know like everything that's being said is being done in a way that's constructive, and no company has it all figured out.
Absolutely not.
And I think it's important for people like you and I and others in the industry that have experience and credibility to continue to talk about these things, because that's how things move.
And I would encourage anyone to, you don't have to be a leader to have thoughts.
Nope.
Um,
Leader's not a title.
Right, and thought leaders are just people who share their thoughts. And it's okay if they're challenged. It's okay if they're half baked, and you have it not fully formed. It's just a seedling of a thought. We were talking about earlier, just of sharing things and debating them and kind of putting them out there is ultimately, I think, what's going to help more than anything. Is people presenting ideas, people being willing to take risks and try things that are managed risks, right? So where you can recognize that it's not working quickly, but raising these questions like why have we had a 30% turnover rate in the industry since 2011, that jumped up to the 40s, and during the pandemic, why do we have a 50% turnover rate with residents? In any other industry where you had a recurring revenue and you said, I'm going to churn half my revenue a year, they tell you got a crappy product. And I've started thinking about the jobs we provide to people like a product, and that the market's telling us that our product's not very good when we have these big turnover rates. I just think that's really important for people to keep in mind. And again, you don't have to be you or me or anyone to share these things. Again, for people on site have all the answers. They're the ones who
I think two things.
Deal with.
I think that I think as leaders we need to also provide a safe space for people to say what they need to say. Now, do you say it publicly or do you say it internally? I would argue if it's a hot take, say it internally and say it privately, right? Don't have your first hot takes publicly. That's not wise. But if you have some things you feel you can contribute, to the greater industry that that your supervisor and your company will support as well, then feel free to share. I think that's what the public forum is. I mean, everyone wants to define what these public forums and what LinkedIn needs to be. The reality is, there's an audience for all types of content that are out there, and if you have something to say and you want to share it, whether it be EQ or operational detail stuff or tactical stuff or leadership stuff, say what you need to say.
Or even day in the life stuff that's not being overtly critical, or even not overtly, just critical of your company, your team, which might get you in trouble, but just saying it's my experience.
Yeah. And to say what you need to say, even privately within your organization or to your supervisor, or even publicly, it takes a certain amount of courage. And I think a lot of people just,
it's easy to
there's some fear there about retaliation, or I can get in trouble for this. And I think, for me, and I'll just kind of end it with this, is, I think, 2020 for me realized the world can go sideways really quickly. Say what you need to say, love who you need to love, work as hard as you possibly can, and let the chips fall where they may. And and I've just really kind of, for myself, professionally and personally, blossomed and kind of leaned into that. And just, I'm here. I'm going to be honest and say what I need to say, and I'm going to do it respectfully and with the utmost sort of love and support.
Absolutely. Have faith that it will work out as long as your intentions are in the right spot. You work hard. The universe tends to take care of you. So, Tony, really, really appreciate the time. Thank you for making it. It was fun. Just like time flew by, as usually the handful of times we've spoken before always seems to be the case. So, we'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
And of course, anything I can ever do, please let me know. But appreciate it so much. And we will we'll get this out there for people. Anyone who was able to watch live, thank you so much. And keep in mind, we might have answers if y'all ever have questions. So I would love to hear from some people next month. And with that, we're out. Thank you, everybody.